Hi everybody. Today we are just going to do a simple before and after water change here on my 125. I'm going to be moving my fish that are in quarantine out of quarantine and putting them in this tank this evening. And I want to do a nice big water change, get the tank all cleaned up, get the glass looking nice and clear so we can see the fish when we put them in there. And I'm also making some adjustments to the pH levels in both of the tanks. This tank has a pH, it looks like it's around 6, possibly 6.4. It's kind of hard to tell when you get down low like that. The pH drops from 6.4 down to 6 on the little measurement scale. So we're somewhere down around in there in that pale yellow area. But my quarantine tank is sitting, well, was this morning sitting around 7.6 to maybe 7.8. Again, when you start getting to that upper end of what the scale is for that low range pH, it gets a little difficult to tell exactly where you're sitting, but I was in the upper 7s. And so what I'm trying to do is bring the pH in this tank up a little bit while bringing the pH down in my quarantine tank. And so far I've got the quarantine tank down to just below 7. We're probably about 6.8 right now. So they are probably ready to make the transfer into this tank. And therefore I'm ready to do a nice big water change on it. So you can see I've got a lot of the green cyanobacteria starting to grow in sheets across the top of things up here where it gets plenty of light. So we're going to get in there and we're going to get some of that out with my siphon hose. You can see it's even peeling off in sheets off of the glass. So we're going to use the siphon hose and we're going to remove as much of that as we can. So I will be moving around the tank with a bucket and a siphon hose, but I will also just have the regular gravel vac siphon going at the far end of the tank, and that'll be draining into the other room, and that'll be the bulk of what we do the water change on. And I also added some eggshell this morning, hoping that brings the pH in this tank up overall just a little bit. And you can see a little bit of the white in the back of the tank, some of those little white flecks. And especially as we move off to the right where the power head is blowing it all, I sort of poured the ground up. I grind it to it's like a coarse sand, and then I poured it in front of that power head, which spread it all out. And with the fairly coarse gravel I have in the back, the finely ground eggshells kind of sift down and make their way down into the gravel, and you don't even notice them back there. And then you get all the benefits of having eggshells in your aquarium. And we are going to talk about the benefits of having eggshells in your aquarium. That is my preferred method of remineralizing my water and for adding a little bit of carbonate hardness, for a little bit of pH stability. Eggshells are my preferred method, and again, we'll be talking about that in a video fairly soon. So I'm going to get started. We will go ahead and start working on the tank. I'll let you know where you can go ahead and skip to so you can see what the after looks like if you don't want to watch all the stuff in the middle. But in the meantime, we're going to call this your before. But in the meantime, we're going to call this your before. And there's your after. So did a pretty big water change, probably about 40%, maybe 50% when you consider that the rocks and the substrate and all of the plants and the woodwork and everything is in the lower half of the tank. So even though I may not have pulled what appeared to be 50% of the water out of the tank, I may have actually pulled 50% of the physical volume of the water out of the tank. Regardless, it was still a pretty significant water change. And I found out by giving it maybe half an hour after I did the water change, I checked the pH again, and I actually lowered the pH in the tank. It's now down to about, I don't know, it looks like it's somewhere around 6, maybe 6.2. It's a very pale yellow vial now. I was hoping I'd bring it up a little bit, but it's more pale yellow now than it was when I started. I compared the two vials side by side, so whatever it started at and whatever it finished at, it's definitely lower now than it was. So probably not going to be moving the fish over tonight from the quarantine tank. I'm going to let the pH in this tank come up a little bit. I'm hoping that simply having the eggshells in there will encourage the pH to come up a little bit. It should be adding some carbonates to the tank. It is calcium carbonate after all, or at least 95% calcium carbonate. And during the water change, or after the water change, honestly, when I realized that the pH had actually gone down from the water change, I actually put some more eggshells in there, and I also added a small handful of the poultry grit. And if you're not familiar with what the poultry grit is, that is a combination of crushed oyster shell and aragonite coral, crushed coral and crushed oyster shell. It's actually for poultry to eat. It helps with their gizzard. It puts a little bit of grit in their gizzard for them to further process their food. Plus it provides them calcium carbonate for their eggshells. So the eggshells will in turn give me calcium carbonate plus some other nice healthy trace minerals that are supplied by the eggshells. And hopefully in time the pH will start to come up a little bit. If it doesn't come up too much within the next 24 hours, I will start working on bringing the pH in the quarantine tank down. And once I get it down to about, 6.6, 6.5, that'll be close enough that simply swapping them from one tank to the other won't be that big a deal. So I could have gotten in there and done a little bit better of a job at cleaning away some of the cyanobacteria and growth you can see across the spray bar in the back. It's still some sheets on there, and I very clearly missed some chunks here and there on top of the Java fern, but I'm more than happy with the results of how much stuff we got out of there in this water change. My goal was not to sterilize the tank or strip every last little bit of the cyanobacteria out of the tank. It was just to get the tank cleaned up and looking nice again, and we really did a good job with that. Got a bunch of that stuff out of there. I don't know if I've mentioned it recently, but in addition to the great big siphon hose that I've used before in my videos, I've shown you how I get in there, not with the gravel vac that has a large end that reduces, and therefore you get a nice slow suction at the beginning and allows you to vac your gravel without actually sucking the gravel right out of the tank. But I have a fairly large hose that I use to really remove larger stuff, and I use it to remove chunks of cyanobacteria. I actually use it when I want to remove the gravel from the tank. I actually use it to literally suck the gravel out of the tank. But that's a bit large. It's a bit much when you're trying to just get the tank cleaned up. It either sucks the water out so fast that you just have to work so fast to get it out of there, or it grabs a hold of the leaves of the plants and it tears them all up. The other piece of hose I use to do that with is a little piece of airline hose, and that is so small that it clogs up constantly and it takes forever to get it done. And so I finally went to the Home Depot and I bought a little piece of vinyl tubing that is somewhere in the middle. The internal diameter is probably about 1/4 inch or something like that. It's fairly significant compared to airline hose, but it's not what you'd call a big thick hose by any stretch of the imagination. But it did allow me to really get a lot of the stuff out of there, and I didn't even go through one 5-gallon bucket in the process of vacuuming all that stuff out. So you can see how much stuff I removed. And yet I did that by removing less than 5 gallons of water into a bucket with that medium-sized siphon. So maybe we'll shoot a video about that specifically here in the near future so we can get a good look at how that works. In the meantime, I'm going to say thanks for watching. This after part was a little longer than I expected, but I guess you've probably all come to expect that by now from me. So thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Make sure you're subscribed and all that good stuff. Don't forget, this one here is my 125-gallon tank. I will say thanks once again. I'll see you real soon in the next one.